Mr. Stow, one of my absolute favourite ripperologists. That title upsets a lot of people. Um, Lindsay Siverter was never. She's always the thing about the whole thing, which I've discovered, particularly in the last couple of years, is off the back of the Autumn of Terror. There's a whole industry, and you've got figures like yourself, Stuart P. Evans, Paul Begg, Martin Fido, God rest him. There's probably, you know, Philip Hutchinson. There's a load of people like Mick Priestley. Real people who've dedicated the time to the and the craft to like yourself. What really interests me with you is the Lechmere thing, and I don't think there's anyone like greatly more knowledgeable on the whole Lechmere theory, and of course very different with some of the suspects, and there's some hardcore ones as well. Your Jacob Levy's, your Thomas Cutbushes, but the thing with your man is he was linked to one of the murders. He was actually there. He found, and it's almost as if for over 100 years the world forgot this. But of course, he gave a different name, didn't he? What made you start following, as you say, all roads lead back to Lechmere?
Well, I'll go back to the thing I said in the beginning. I find the term ripperologist a ridiculous term, to be honest. It kind of makes it sound like it's a science or something, doesn't it? And it's a field of study that some people try and take very seriously. Nowadays, there's a bit of a trend amongst people to take it incredibly seriously and make out that they're not really interested in, say, the murders or the suspects, but are interested in the social history around the period. But you don't have to get involved in studying Jack the Ripper to become interested in the social history of late Victorian England or late Victorian London. So why don't they just step outside of anything to do with Jack the Ripper and study London social history, if that's what they're really interested in? But it's all the sort of pretense to try and make out, oh no, we don't like this gory stuff, or we don't like the whodunit aspect of it. Actually, the whole thing about Jack the Ripper is that it is full of mythology and stupid stuff, and the Chamber of Horrors, and silly people in top hats and fog and all this sort of thing. The mythology around it is part and parcel of the whole thing.
You've got to have the fog. It's just in the small print talking about Jack the Ripper.
Sorry?
It's just in the small print when you talk about Jack the Ripper, the fog. In actual fact, it wasn't even foggy on any of the nights.
Yeah, but all these things are part of the mythology that surrounds the whole case, and you can't take away the mythology and all the schlock side of it, because that's part and part. It was there from the beginning. There were Chamber of Horror things at the time the murders were happening. It's been part and parcel of it from the word go. And to try and pretend it isn't and get this sort of high and mighty attitude that some people try and do now is ridiculous, frankly. And it will never be accepted. And they think they want to get it accepted as a respectful branch of history, for example. But it never will be. It never will be, because, as I say, part and parcel of it will always be this sort of slightly schlocky sensationalist stuff, and it was from the beginning. To try and take it out is totally unrealistic. But what was the second part of your question?
Well, I tell you what I want to say to you. So I was there the other week, and I had a look for the first time at, obviously it's gone now, I think it was called Providence Row, which was obviously where your man Lechmere was from. They reckon Aaron Kosminski lived there with his sisters at the time of the murders.
Providence Row is the road behind what was Miller's Court, the Providence Row night refuge. I think you probably mean Providence Street, don't you? Providence
Yes.
Street, down the
Sorry,
back of.
the one you
No, no, no.
said,
It's down the back of Burner, what was Burner Street, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Off Fairclough Street, I think, in actual fact, where Kosminski lived, yeah, or where one of Kosminski's brothers lived. In actual fact,
yeah.
the other one lived in his sister, and his other brother lived in Greenfield Street, which is not very far away from there, anyway.
Just
I
stepping
saw a
away
video.
from,
I saw a video with you around there. You must have made the other week on
yeah,
Providence.
I mean, stepping a
Yeah.
little bit away from Lechmere for a minute. I spoke to Paul Begg, and he said to me, he said, if it was good enough for, I mean, I know Frederick Aberline was fancy George Chapman, but if it was good enough for, the book which come out in 1892, and if it was good enough for them then, 135 years ago, if, I mean, Richard Jones' theory was it was a poor Polish Jew who we don't even know yet. No one even knows the name. It is really, really interesting. I mean, I spoke to Mick Priestley. He is convinced that it was Albert Backett. I really like the theory of the Lechmere. And just again, where did it all come from? Where you just, because you've done more than, and I do watch. I watch everything. You've done more than probably anyone on the planet with the Lechmere. The family, the tree. You've traced them back to, some of them were in the Bethnal Green tube disaster. Where did it come from, Ed, that you just started this kind of passion for putting all the pieces together?
Well, I know I've known members of the that family in the East End since 30 years ago. Was it 40 years ago? 40 years ago, blimey. Doesn't time fly? And but I didn't know, and they didn't know anything about the connection to Charles Cross. There were people from the early 2000s who started looking at Cross in a very minor way, saying, "Oh, this person, perhaps he could be a suspect," and that led to a couple of other people. One was called Connor, who looked into him and to try and find him in the census records, and Charles Cross at 22 Doveton Street, because that's the address that he was recorded as living at. Or the trouble is, in the police records, in the press records of the inquest, he's called all sorts of things like George Cross, for example. Some of the newspaper reporters at the inquest wrote his name down as George Cross. So there was some confusion as to what name to look him up under in the censuses. But eventually they found that Charles Allen Cross, which is one of the in the police report by Swanson, Chief Inspector Swanson, he had his name down as Charles Allen Cross of 22 Doveton Street in a police report on the 19th of October 1888. And if you look up at 22 Doveton Street, there was someone called Charles Allen Lechmere living at the same address.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it was obviously assumed, I'm told, I should say assumed, not assumed, but I always say, anyway, it was assumed that it was obviously the same guy. Charles Allen Cross, 22 Doveton Street, was really Charles Allen Lechmere, 22 Doveton Street. Then people started looking him up. And this came to my attention because there wasn't that much on the internet or anything about this. And it was brought to my attention by one of the Lechmere family, an article mentioning it. And I looked into it because I'm actually a bit of a skeptical type person. So if you were to tell me something, I bumped into something, my initial reaction, if it didn't sound totally realistic, my initial reaction would be, "That's going to be like, oh, rubbish. It's probably nonsense." And so I was looking into the Lechmere case, everything about Charles Allen Cross and his movements, everything to do with him within the case, and looking into his family background on ancestry and things like that. But everything I looked up about him to try and disprove that he was involved in the case, or that he could be the culprit, sort of went the other way completely. So if you listen, and that's really how a policeman should have investigated it. You need to clear the person, because he was there and supposedly found the body. He was really found by the body by someone else. It wasn't. You can't compare him to all the other people who found bodies, because he was found by someone else standing by the body. And there's so many exceptions, such as the fact, well, that he's the only person, anything like that, who gave a false name. I won't say it's a false name. He gave a name, or he didn't give his proper name. He withheld his proper name. That's the significant fact. Not the fact anyone can call themselves anything that they want in British society, but there is a concept within Britain, and has been actually since the time of Thomas Cromwell, when he was Henry VIII's first minister in the mid 16th century, in the 1500s, when they brought in parish registers to register births, deaths, and marriages, because they wanted to know who was who and what was what, and what your name was. That's 500 years ago. And so there's been this concept of legal, proper, real names for 500 years. It's not a new thing. And our name of a Christian name and a surname, it goes back to then. Unlike many other countries around the world, in this country, it does go back to then. So there's a very well-established concept of what is your real proper name. That's not to say that in Britain you can't choose to call yourself anything you want, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you do have a legal, real, proper name. And he went under that in hundreds and hundreds of records, well, not hundreds and hundreds, way over 100 records that I found him giving his proper name very punctiliously, year after year after year after year, in a multiple range of different records. And then he pops up in the inquest and calls himself Charles Cross, and that's an exception. And when you're looking at a murder and someone involved in a murder, you would look for exceptions, and that's a glaring exception that can't be painted in any other way. And he also, it's the other one of the other big exceptions about the Polly Nichols murder and his involvement in it, is that he didn't turn up in court for 3 days, and for the first 3 days they thought PC Neal found the body, and they had to change the story 3 days later when he turned up in court and said, no, actually I did. And that's the only time that happened in the Jack Ripper case. That's another big exception. Anyway, so as I said, when you investigate a murder, you should be looking for exceptions, and you should be trying to clear the person who's there and find a good reason why he can't have done it. You just can't do that with Lechmere. But at the same time, you find all these exceptions. And the reason why that expression, all roads lead to Lechmere, is a bit of a sort of joke, and it's because Lechmere was hidden in plain sight, and his candidacy as being a suspect as Jack the Ripper is like an affront to all these people who have been involved in studying Jack the Ripper for decades. And people involved in that thing called Ripperology tend to like all sorts of weird and wonderful celebrity type suspects, or madmen, or people who are like ghouls. When, if you know anything about serial killers, they're not like that. They're like every man. They're just a bland person who you don't notice, and that's exactly how they get away with it, which is actually more frightening than some sort of overt ghoul, because it could be just any old bod living next door could be the murderer.
I mean, Richard Jones said whoever he was, I mean, I personally don't believe he was lucky 5 times, right? He knew the area, unbelievable. That was what Lechmere did. You know, we know where his mother, the childhood, the family home was. Yeah, sorry, my thought there was, so Richard Jones said whoever he was, he must have just been able to blend into the area like wallpaper. And you know yourself, you're very familiar with the East End. Even today, yes, we can kind of go up Artillery Lane and see that. But back then, the whole area was like that. It was like, it must have been an absolute haven. If you were ever going to pull off evil things like this, 5 murders in 10 weeks, possibly more. Obviously, there's 11 in total. We don't know. It would have been the perfect hunting ground. What do you think?
I don't know if it's the perfect hunting ground. It wasn't the poorest districts of London then, actually. One of the interesting things about the Jack the Ripper phenomenon is that this whole thing about East End, West End, and how the East End is the sort of opposite to the West End, and it mirrors it from the posh to the poor side and all that sort of thing. In many ways, the Jack the Ripper murders accelerated the decline of the East End in social terms to become poorer, because it gave it a bad reputation. And areas on the South Bank were a lot, around Waterloo Station, were a lot poorer, and areas around Clerkenwell Road on the inner north of the city, that was a much poorer areas around Soho and around what's now the Aldwych in where Covent Garden and Theatreland, all around there, that was an incredibly poor area, much poorer, according to Booth's surveys, which happened at the time. And the pockets of the East End were poor, but it wasn't the poorest part of London, although and all these sort of alleyways, all those areas would have been honeycombed with alleyways and little nooks and crannies, as the East End was more than now. So whether, lots of areas of London would have potentially been breeding grounds for this to have happened. And there are even more prostitutes in the Waterloo area, that South Bank of London, than there were in the East End as well. Really? Which is a reason, but that's a reason why actually the culprit must have been from the East End. Otherwise, why would he focus all his activity there? If he was looking for prostitutes, there were other areas of London he could have gone to find prostitutes, or were poorer, or were equal, so someone like, I don't know, Druitt, for example, is a totally unrealistic suspect in my opinion. But
yeah, absolutely.
Druitt could have equally, why would he focus on the East End? There's nothing to draw Druitt to the East End. Why didn't he do one or two in the South Bank, where he would have been more at home with, probably because it's nearer and more directly linked to where he lived in what's that place? Near Greenwich. I can't remember the name of the place now. That district he lived in near Greenwich, and it's on the route between there and his chambers. So why would he do it? And his chambers were quite close to that area I just mentioned, around Covent Garden and the Aldwych. Why didn't he just go there and find someone to kill? Why did he go to the East End where he had no connection to?
I mean, can I ask you, Ed, what I find amazing? So in Swanson's book, they have 3 suspects. Montague Druitt is ridiculous, and the only thing that we've known on that is his family thought he was Jipper, and the timing. So obviously, he was found in the Thames about New Year's Eve, I think it was, but he'd been in there about a month. So after that. But other than that, I mean, the Michael Ostrog, I think it's well known after that he was in prison in France. So
I did a video about that.
Sorry?
I thought you told me you watched all my videos. I did a video about Ostrog.
So yeah, I'm sure he was in. I've seen everything, and that's
yeah. Ostrog was in jail in France, but so McNaughton did this report.
Yeah,
Melville Knowles, one of the most senior policemen in Scotland Yard at the time, who was appointed to his role just after the Ripper murders, that he would have known all his colleagues and so forth were involved in the Ripper murders. His immediate superior was Anderson, who certainly vetted his report, and he was in charge of the CID at the time of the Ripper murders. And yet in this report, it says that the three most likely suspects are Ostrog, who was in jail in France at the time. So there cannot have been a single investigative proper reason for Ostrog to be suspected, apart from him being a criminal. They plucked his name out the hat, basically, and said incorrect things like he was a sexual maniac and things like this, where he had no crimes against him, or no charges against him. He had a long charge sheet against him, but it was for theft and being a competence trickster, just because he was a bit of a criminal that they thought he was, and he was a foreigner, of course, Ostrog. They're the only reasons that they had to suspect him, and he was in jail at France at the time. Then you've got Druitt, who they call a doctor when he wasn't. Every one of the three suspects, they get basic facts wrong. That's what they've all got in common. So they thought Druitt was a doctor, and they thought Kosminski was dead when he didn't. They think he died in. They thought he died in 1891 when he didn't die until I think 1919. So that's but it's very similar to the Yorkshire Ripper. Sorry, just say it's similar to the Yorkshire. People who put faith in. I think you said a few minutes ago that you can't do better than accept what the police thought at the time. Well, if you look at the way the Yorkshire Ripper investigation was conducted, that hardly gives you confidence in the opinions of the police when they thought it was that weird, the guy from up your neck of the woods, wasn't he? Wearside Jack.
That was a guy from Sunderland, and he died a couple of years back. Jacqueline Hill from Middlesbrough, she was the 13th one. She certainly wouldn't have been killed without that guy who, I know I watch a lot of you're quite interested. Funny enough, so I was in Leeds the other week. So I'm doing a boxing book on a guy, Nick Manners. So he showed me where Jimmy Savile's, and he took me around to where Sutcliffe attacked. Going back to your channel, Ed, must have been about 3 years ago. I just come across you and I was just like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Where did the idea come from to do that? So anyone, you must. So Ed's channel is called The House of Lechmere. It's very unique. It's got a kind of very, very kind of familiar start. The music. Where did all that come from? Where you've just portrayed this kind of, it's almost like your ring walk with the music, and they're all different. They're all. I absolutely love it, and I said I've literally watched everything on your channel, yours and Richard Jones. But was it just a thing in lockdown where you just thought, you know what, I'm going to make a channel?
Yeah, I did start it during. If you started watching it during lockdown, I started making them during lockdown because there wasn't a lot to do. The first few episodes, the music, I like having theme music on things, and so when people hear it, I remember in the 70s. This is probably part of the reason why. In the 70s, there was one of these wartime drama series set in France. I don't know if it's secret. It's a bit like Secret Army, one of those things, or a serious version of LOLO, and where the French resistance, and they'd fly English women maybe in to link up with them to help resistance, to do this or do that in France, and you had the Gestapo looking for them and all that stuff. And they had that the theme music was that Beethoven's, I think it's the ninth, which I think was actually in the war was actually how we opened our broadcasts. When we broadcast to the French, we opened the broadcast with that Beethoven clip, so the people in France would know that's what's coming on, or in occupied Europe, people would know that they're going to be getting information from the BBC to keep their morale up. And that theme music thing is important to give your program a character, isn't it? And so that's why I chose it.
It's almost like funeral music.
Yeah, it's a bit Hammer House of Horror, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, yeah.
And you know, you Lechmere one. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who's done the extensive research you've done. Will you always be sticking around Lechmere, or do you want to go to other leads?
Well, I'm going. I've got loads more episodes that I've got in my head to do that could keep me going for another couple of years probably. But I want to go through the other suspects, comparing them. There's lots more murders I haven't gone through, and why? Because I believe. But my belief is that the Jack the Ripper murders were one little phase. I think this makes far more sense from a criminological point of view as well. That the Jack the Ripper murders were a small phase in the middle of a much longer murder spree
Yeah.
before and after. The idea, I think, that someone came along, did these very particular murders, and then without doing anything before or anything after, doesn't make any sort of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And about the only suspect you could fit around that is Lechmere as well. And I believe he started as early as 1872, 1873, and went on perhaps to 1899, perhaps. And there's around 20 odd murders, perhaps, that he may have committed. When you look at all these other ones, cold case, unsolved murders in the London area, it's sensible to look at them all. I don't know whether he did them all. Arguably, I don't know if he did any. You could argue, but I don't know that he did them all. But it's sensible to look at each one where he has a way of getting there, and there's a way of, and you can kind of link them. It's sensible to take them into consideration. So I'm going to do many more films on quite a few other murders, which I've alluded to most of them in other films, but I haven't done detail on them.
Well, that's great news for me, and I look forward. Do you know when you talk about ripperologists? Now, this might surprise people, but apparently, and I was told this from good authority, the first person who ever used that was Jeremy Beadle. I don't know whether you ever met him, but he was a huge, huge figure in the kind of Whitechapel industry, if you like. You know, the Jack the Chipper bar. Chip shop, which I've used for the thumbnail. You've got Jack the Clipper barbers. There's Jack the Ripper museum. There is a whole multi-million pounds industry. Very much like, Bram Stoker was about that time. He written Dracula and never saw the profit. And Jack the Ripper, yes, there was killings, but Jack the Ripper is a media creation, doesn't exist. And of course, the first paper to sell 1 million copies did so with Jack the Ripper on the front. When you're walking about London, does that kind of piss you off when you're seeing Jack the Ripper key rings, Jack the Ripper glasses, T-shirts? Because I don't like that kind of thing. I don't mind the education.
I don't look. I've got no problem with it. As I was saying earlier, the whole commercialization schlocky thing, the way it was in the Chamber of Horrors, in the London dungeons, it's all part and parcel of the phenomenon, and was from the day one. As you say, the first newspaper that sold 1 million copies. I think there's a chance some of the Jack the Ripper letters are genuine, in fact, and possibly the one that coins the term Jack the Ripper. But if it wasn't, and it was by a journalist, we'll never know for sure now, whether it was a journalist making it up. That again is all part of this mystique around the case, and this sort of misleading information, all that sort of stuff. So I've got no problem with the commercialization of it, because, as I say, it's part and parcel of that, and was from the word go. And I don't think it's actually disrespectful to the victims either, because the victims are actually, because of all this interest and commercialization, it means actually that the victims, particularly of the Jack the Ripper murder victims, the 5 most well-known ones, are probably the most well-known murder victims of any murders in the world, almost by name, and they are kind of remembered and gained a form of immortality as a result of that. because of all this thing that's grown up around the whole murder cycle. If this interest had never grown up around it, they'd just be forgotten people. No one would know their names, actually.
Yeah. They've achieved a lifetime of immortality in death that they could never do in life. You know, the East End, your Jack Spot Commas, the Craze. What are the real East Enders? I'm told from spending a lot of time over the years, don't subscribe. So obviously me, fat dozy northerner, I come down and thought, like, you know, I mean, I've been and sat in like Pelici's, and I've sat in Bethnal Green Workman's Club, and they despise the Cray twins and all that kind of bullshit. But like you said, unfortunately, it's a huge part of the history. It's social history. You know, 1888. So when 1998, the Jack the Ripper film, the centenary, you had beer, pints dyed red, and it's a huge part of the East End. And when you talk about the East End, it's like Charles Dickens had in his books, bloody the Informer. In one Informer was from Aldgate. They have that stereotypical cheeky kind of villainy Cockney. Alan Partridge said Cockney, a place in London where criminals live, caused an outroar. but I totally understand that. We were talking earlier about the East End and the West End. That song, I think it was out in '87. The West End Girls and East End Boys. That was filmed in Golston Street, which was obviously, you know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. No, I know the song. I didn't know that. I don't remember the video.
If you watch it, you can
Boys
see
and
it.
West End Girls. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can't remember this guy.
It is. You've captured that. You know, the people from the West End with a bit of class, and the villains from the East End who are, you know, just a bit of rough. And do you think the East End will always have that image?
No, well, historically, because that East End doesn't exist anymore. But the as a historical thing, it kind of died out by the early '90s, mid '90s, perhaps. But the as a historical phenomenon, it is. Look, when I used to live in the East End for a long time, up until about 2000, and people had the proper East End people had no problem with the Jack the Ripper stuff. I just thought it was just a thing that went on there, and the sort of newcomers, yuppie types who moved into the gentrified parts of Spitalfields had a problem with it, but the proper East End people didn't. And they didn't really have a problem with this identification with East End and villainy either. Actually, they all sort of played up to it a bit because you had Minder and the Sweeney and all that sort of stuff as well, and all that sort of that was in the latter days when you had the last. You know, you had a few more new Cockney rhyming slang terms made up at the end of the days, when people still like talking in a Cockney accent and putting it on a bit, you know, putting on the Cockney thing a bit. That was what went on in the '80s and early '90s. That was, and they thought they were a bit flash because of it, you know, and that was like the last hurrah of the East End. But they had those East End people had no problem with Jack the Ripper. The Crays were a more you did or you didn't like them, probably because they were more recent, and people because probably I'm going to say because they were quite heavy-handed in some of the pubs they may have went round and controlled. I think they probably upset as many people as they didn't. They upset probably more people than the ones who liked them. Put it that way, I suspect.
And of
but
course,
I might branch. I know quite a lot about the Cray thing and all that stuff, so I probably will branch out into doing some videos about that in the fullness of time, and generally centric like the siege of Sydney Street and different aspects like that, which I'm very interested in as well.
Yeah, well, of course, the twins would have been 90 this month. I kind of discovered Jack the Ripper when I was 11. I read the Twins when I was 13, and then I kind of started studying boxing. I think I said to you earlier that the East End and the East End and poverty will always go hand in hand, and that's why there's been so many great fighters. I mean, I'm talking to a very well-known boxing gym at the minute about possibly doing a book. I mean, that would be fantastic if you did something on the Twins. I mean, I was speaking to Chris Lambriano a couple of years back, and this was about 2018, and we were discussing about doing a book 50 years on. You know, and he took me round to where the Regency was. He took me round to where they killed Jack the Hat. Yeah, where they chucked the gun in the canal, and yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. But a lot of people, you know, because Tom Hardy played them and the Kems played them, it seemed to be socially acceptable. But I've met people in Bethnal Green Workmen's Club who absolutely just said the figures of evil. Ponters, thieves, ponters. But as I said, it will always be connected to the East End. And, you know, I don't think them kind of naughty buses outside the Blind Beggar every Saturday, that's never going to stop. And the interest is hugely there. It is, without a shadow of a doubt. I was in Whitechapel the other week, and I think I counted about 7 to 9 tours in my eyesight. It's incredible.
What, Jack the Ripper tours? Do you mean, or grey tours?
Well, Jack the Ripper tours. The evening. There's a couple every night.
Yeah, well, there's probably a lot more than a couple every night. Yeah, because
you know, I mean, I must have seen somewhere like 7 to 9 in my eyesight.
Yeah.
It is. Richard Jones said to me, the East End, if you look hard enough, you will see it. You know, Brick Lane, the Bricklayers Arms at the top, you know, but it is getting harder and harder as the years go by. It is vanishing, isn't it? I don't think. I was talking to Lindsay Sivert last year, and she said, you know, in another centenary, what's that, 65 years, I don't think there will be Jack the Ripper tours. Do you?
Oh, I don't know. There probably will. You don't. It's difficult to know what society will look like in 65 years, isn't it? And what sort of world will be, if you're living, what sort of world you'll be living in 65 years. But I would probably say there will, because it's something that's got an enduring interest. The East End is a very interesting place historically. Probably one of the most interesting, and it's got a very dense history, and it's probably one of the most historically interesting places in the country. It's a bit like perhaps Rome, where all these different things over the centuries have occurred. It is a very, very historically interesting place, and it's normally dark history as well.
Can I ask you a question, Ed? So Richard Jones said to me, some people go, you know, I mean, Mick Priestley said, when I'm walking up Brick Lane, people go, oh, there's the Jack the Ripper man. And Richard Jones said people just refer to him as Jack the Ripper. I mean, I was with Alex Reid the other week, you know, married to Katie Price, or was, and he couldn't believe it. And he said, you know what, we feel like we've had trauma. When you go down Brick Lane, we were bombarded. Oh, have £20 off this meal. But then the meal starts at 100 quid. It was unbelievable. And I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. But do you kind of people, because you're getting very well known now, do people see you as that Jack the Ripper guy in the street?
No. I don't think, no, not at all, no.
Right. And with regards with your channel, are you
a guy who I work with, who I hadn't told that I do the channel. I saw him the other day because I hadn't seen him for a while. I saw him the other day, and he suddenly goes, was just joking about pay rates or something. I can't remember. He goes, "You'll be able to pay me because you're doing your Jack the Ripper channel." I said, "Who told you that?" And he goes, "Look, Oh, I'm just interested in Jack Ripper. I saw you on your. I've been watching your channel. Oh, it's a bit, yeah. So people unexpected. Once you've got quite a big audience, and I've got a reasonably sized audience now, people will.
I said to it's a very well-known quote, and I've said it loads of times. Richard Jones says it a lot. Samuel Johnson: "If you get tired, a man's tired of London, you're tired of life." But it's not only the most interesting historical; it's the most haunted city in the world. Apparently, I mean, you've been on the streets, Ed. Have you ever had any have you ever had any things where you felt things or saw things around the streets of London?
Not in London. No, I don't really believe in all that stuff, I'm afraid. I know Lindsay Siviter does, for example, but no, I've never had any supernatural experiences in London. No.
So regarding your channel, you're going to keep it as busy as ever. As I said, I'm going to put it in the bio, the House of Lechmere. It's probably a little bit embarrassing. I don't know whether I feel like a little stalker or something, but I have saw everything off your channel, and I mean everything. I've done yours and Richard Jones' channel. There's not one thing I haven't watched. And you're my form of and the content you put out. I would, and there is, as you said, there's going to be more Lechmeres certainly in your head. But I would like to see you go on to. You're very knowledgeable on the Cray twins, and I was there the other week in Myrtle Street, which is, of course, where Jack Spot Comma was Cottonfield Mansions, I think it was, something like that. Is that part of London history interests you as well, or?
Yeah, that whole aspect is very interesting. I bump into Richard Jones quite a lot because he goes around doing filming, obviously, in the East End. And I sometimes bump into him when I'm doing a bit of filming. He's doing a bit of filming, and have a bit of a chat. But yeah, he's an interesting bloke. He's got a pretty grounded view of the whole thing, and obviously he's built up a lot of knowledge over the years. He's a nice guy, and but. Yeah, I want to expand the whole range, going back to the Peasants' Revolt and earlier even about things that happened in the East End, Captain Cook and the Crays.
Captain Cook, he lived on 88 Mile End Street.
Yeah.
But of course he was from Middlesbrough. Up here they've named the hospital after him. But of course, as soon as he got old enough,
was his ship from Whitby or somewhere? Or was it Mike?
So it was from. He was from.
Okay, mixed up with someone else.
Yeah, you're getting him mixed up. So he was from Martin. They've got like Captain Cook's monument up here.
There's a big hospital. There's a big hospital, isn't there? Captain Cook Hospital or something.
Hospital, yeah. I personally think Middlesbrough celebrate Brian Clough more. Because as soon as he can, he spent 15 years in Whitechapel, and then of course he went and he was murdered across the other side of the world. But he wasn't as patriotic about Middlesbrough as it. I think it was something like 235 years ago, but he is massively, massively celebrated in Teesside. And yeah, I think there's a lot of other people that could. Probably, Brian Clough.
Did he dump you in favour of the East End?
Well, it was before a time that the Parmos weren't there. So the Parmos, Middlesbrough's food. It's like pie and mash to the Cockney. Haggis in Scotland. It's. I don't know whether you've heard of it, and it was long before then. But yeah, he basically sold Middlesbrough out and pissed off to Mile End.
Did you do a video? Did you do a video about that food a while ago?
Yes. So it's.
I think I might have seen it.
Yeah, I'll send you the video now. But Crystal Meth used.
With that guy, I can't remember his name. Is it Sean Atwood? Were you with him when you did it?
Yes, I was. So Crystal Meth users will never understand draws from the Parmo. I've give a lot of famous people the Palmo. Hackney's John L. Gardner, the boxer.
Yeah.
Loads of boxers. Alan Thompson, a footballer. Alex Reid. And it's a Middlesbrough dish. If you can kind of go a few miles up the road in Newcastle and people have never heard of them, but they are becoming more popular. But you can, when you eat them, you do feel your insides are clogging up. But they are very, very nice. They're a lot more, the pie and mash, the cockney, the jelly deals and all. I don't mind the bagels, but the pie and mash is not for me. And have you tried jelly deals, Ed?
No, I don't like stuff like that. I don't like seafood, and I've gone off bagels, to be honest. I used to like the bagel shops on Brick Lane, but I don't know if done for libel, but I know people who've been in the back of them, in the kitchen area. They told me stuff, and I don't know how to do it.
Understand. Yeah.
I used to go in there and having a bagel and cream cheese bagel quite often, but I haven't been for a short while. Ever since I was told, ever since someone told me something about the kitchen areas.
Right. Okay. So regarding your channel, then you're gonna be producing content. You're not getting bored. You're not getting sick. I personally think if you're doing less than 2 or 3 videos a week, you're wasting your time on YouTube. It's all about being prolific.
Well, I've never been able to do as many as 2 a week, and I'm doing them more frequently. Before, when I started, I was probably one every 2 or 3 months, even, because of whatever work I was doing was doing me time. I'm trying to do roughly 1 a week now, or perhaps every 8-10 days. My films, I'd say, for a start, I'm doing them slightly too long, really. I'm trying to get them down to 15 minutes or something, but they're like more like 25 to 30. And I would say I put because I like going to locations and filming a location, and I have to often do quite a lot of research to make sure everything's right about it, and find lots of images and stuff. It takes a lot of work to do each one, And
I mean, the experts say the perfect video is 20 to 25 minutes. I don't know whether there's a guy on here, and I've watched all his stuff. So he's called Jules Guides. So he makes a living going all over London telling stories. And he really puts the Cockney accent on, jumping up and down, clipping his heels, and Dick Van Dyke and all this kind of. I don't think he's Cockney.
Has he got a bowler hat?
Yes, he has. He's
I've
very,
seen
very.
it.
Yeah, he's absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen him. Yeah.
He's absolutely huge. He's probably the biggest in London.
Yeah.
Particularly on this.
A lot of his I've seen he's done ones on Jack the Ripper as well, and
yes.
They're often, and he wears a waistcoat maybe sometimes, doesn't he?
Yes.
And but he's light on facts. He tells things like the story. He clearly hasn't researched it very well.
Yes.
And there's going to be. I like to think that I don't make mistakes. Sometimes I make a slip of the tongue or something, or occasionally I make a mistake. But whenever I do, I'm very annoyed. Even if I put like a word thing up and I spell a word wrong, which I did. I spelled genteel wrong on one. The shabby genteel thing about Elizabeth Long saw someone she described as shabby genteel. I spent it gentile, like a Gentile instead of genteel. And that sort of annoyed me, I misspelt it on the caption. But so occasionally I make a mistake. But whenever I watch anything like that guy, he makes loads of mistakes in what he does. He's got a lot of output, but he makes loads of mistakes, and I wouldn't want to do that,
No. He's not. He's got the passion for London. His sister does the songs on the piano, Knees Up Mother Brown, Lambeth Walk. It's all very traditional London, but I do understand. I used to go on the tours. So if you go outside Tower Hill Station at 7 o'clock every night, there's a thing called Strawberry Tours, and it's free, and you just give them, and I've been on tours, and they've been like, Mary Kelly was 23, and I'm sat thinking she was 25, and there's people in the industry that are stealing a living. But yourself, you research, and I probably would say there's probably maybe 12, 15 of you really serious hardcore. I don't know whether you go to the East End conferences, the Whitechapel conferences.
Not
Obviously
down.
Martin Fido's gone now, God rest him. Paul Begg's retired. Donald Rumbelow's retired. I mean, even Stuart P. Evans, you don't really see. So this is why I say I kind of, I know Paul was a bit annoyed when I said I described Richard as being the number one, but Richard is the, you can't watch it. Jock
Who did
the
you
Ripper.
say that to? Paul Begg.
Yeah, and he was a bit ridiculously insulted, I think. And what I meant was basically Paul's lives in Wales, I think now. He's completely off the scene.
But he's
But
been
Richard,
in a few years ago, wasn't he? He was quite ill. But one of the things is the people who were involved in the first phase, if you want to call it the first phase, like all those names that you say, and Skinner,
yeah,
Stuart Evans, Begg, Fido, obviously dead, Rumbelow, those sorts of people. Richard Jones was around then as well, although he must have been quite young then. In a way, they've got bored with it, I think, actually, because
yeah,
they don't. They've sort of been there, done that, and lost in and moved on a bit, made their money in many instances. Because in those days, they were book writers, they were writers involved in the thing. They all got proper publishing deals,
yeah,
made their money,
and
moved on. Maybe got to do tours like Richard Jones does, but Rumbelow is quite old now and
yeah.
not particularly well, and yeah, they've sort of moved on. That's why you don't hear from them now. There's a sort of, if you like, a newer generation around now.
That's exactly what it is. You can see the new blood, and Richard's kind of the last one, if you like. You've
Yeah,
got the
he's a bit of
Priestley's
a crossover. He's a crossover from the old generation to the new generation, isn't he?
very much the king is dead, long live the king.
Mm.
Kind of got the young ones. Mick Priestley, I know you spent a bit of time with him, I have as well. Lovely, lovely guy. His book is fabulous as well. A lot of researchers went into it. Right, Ed, so a couple of questions before I let you go. So Martin Vegas, his channel is called The House of Lechmere. I'm going to share the shit out of it after here. I am going to put it in the link. It's an absolute must. As I said, I watch everything. I have done for probably the last 3.5 years. So there's a question here for you, Ed. Is there any DNA tests have been done regarding the Jack the Ripper thing? Obviously there has, hasn't there?
Well, there was with the Kosminski shawl. Do you want to tell the story of that?
Yes.
Do you want to?
Please.
Okay. There was some material, silk material, which was in the family possession of a family. There was a policeman, acting sergeant Amos Simpson, who had in his possession a long piece of silk material that he passed down through his family, who claimed that Amos Simpson gave it to them because he had retrieved it from the murder scene of Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square, and that it was belonged to her. It was at the crime scene, and so this guy called Russell Edwards bought it. I think it was in an auction. Bought it and looked at it and said it was a shawl. It's probably actually a table runner, a thing that would go down the middle of a table for sort of a formal dinner. And he bought this thing, looked at it, thought there were some stains on it, had them analysed, supposedly by this scientist who he got hold of, and to extract DNA from it, because he reckons it was semen or bodily fluids that had splashed on this material, and claimed there was a link. Then found a Kosminski family member who agreed to supply a DNA sample to match against it and claim that there was a DNA match, but the match was so vague as to be meaningless, effectively. And I think he also claimed that there was some blood on there, and he may have tried to make a link to Catherine Eddowes' family member and claim that that blood matched Catherine Eddowes' the DNA from Catherine Eddowes' family. So you'd have genetic material on this silk table runner from Catherine Eddowes' family and Kosminski's family. That was his claim, but none of it actually really properly stacks up, because the DNA that they extracted was so vague it could have belonged to a large part of the population.
Yeah.
That essentially it. And Amos Simpson was on his beat was in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire, because the Metropolitan Police boundary went out that far in those days, and he lived and worked in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire, nowhere near Mitre Square, which wasn't in the Metropolitan Police area either. It was in the City Police area. So the chances of a Metropolitan Police acting sergeant based in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire turning up at Mitre Square and rescuing a bit of material that was left on the floor, and the City Police not minding him walking off with it, it would have been evidence, wouldn't it, as part of her possessions, is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the last bit of ludicrousness is that it's because Catherine Eddowes' possessions were known, and this thing didn't, this material couldn't have belonged to her. It was, the book claims that Russell Edwards, who I used to know quite well actually, he claims that Kosminski must have brought the material out from his house in Providence Street or wherever he was living, walked down there after killing Catherine Elizabeth Stride, had this bit of material on him, took it with him to Mitre Square, for some reason threw it on the ground and masturbated over it or something. That how likely is all that, you know?
As you do. But do you know what I mean? The thing is with Russell Edwards thing is that I was just going to say that wasn't listed in the items of. I mean, I don't know whether you've been to the Jack the Ripper Museum, Ed.
Yeah.
I mean, I would. It is fabulous.
On cable. Some
Street.
people don't like it, but I don't mind it. I've been there. Yeah, it's not
And,
popular amongst ripperologists.
Yeah, they've got. So the guy who found Catherine Eddowes, they've got his handcuffs in there. They've got his truncheon. And you know, I meet a lot of famous people, but when I was in there last year or the year before, I was like starstruck looking at them. I was just like, wow. So yeah, Ed's
the whole thing about Kosminski and this nation is such a ridiculous story. It doesn't have any. And Russell Edwards was the guy who that whole thing about the Moors murder thing quite recently, you know, the body that he claims he'd found. He was the guy who was behind that as well.
Right. So he's obviously, you know, the people can do things for headlines. But yeah, I just want to say, Ed, so your channel, The House of Lechmere, as I said, anyone who wants to click on it, I'm going to share it on my community page as well. Also, Ed, I'm going to give you your last word, mate. Is there anything you want to talk about?
Well, I'll just recommend everyone watch my latest film. My latest film's about what's it been? God, I can't remember what my latest film's about. It's terrible, isn't it? It's about the Moors murders, not the Moors murders, the Yorkshire Ripper murders, and the connection between Peter Sutcliffe. That's the other thing I'm interested in. When you look at a lot of serial killers, most people involved in ripperology don't understand serial killers and how they operate and what they do. And studying other serial killers, I did another series of a couple of videos about the Long Island serial killer, where they've arrested the guy out in America, Rex Heuermann, and looking at links and how they behave and what they do. That's another very interesting subject. I'm not an expert on on all worldwide serial killers, but there are some who are very interesting for parallels, such as Sutcliffe, such as the Long Island serial killer. Actually, another one was a very good film. I don't know if you've seen 10 Rillington Place, the Christie thing.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
A very good film with uh, Richard Attenborough, isn't it? And a very good film. And there's lots of parallels between that case, the Christie case, and the Lechmere case actually as well. And I'm going to work through all these things as well. So I think they're quite interesting.
And your channel is going to continue, and we can look forward to seeing new content. And if anyone, of course, wants to get in touch with you, you're very approachable. And as I said, I'm going to put Ed's link in the bio. Click on it; it's an absolute must. I'm going to share this video to every Jack the Ripper page in the world. Ed, always a pleasure, sir. Always really fabulous to listen to you, and keep up the great work.
All right, and I'll see you in March when you come down.
I'll be down in March. I've got a few things. I've got to kind of discover the old Jewish East End. I've interviewed a couple of boxing writers. Do you know Ian Dart from Sky Sports?
I remember him, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a lot of people, a lot of old faces, but Mickey Duff was a one-off. So he was Aldgate. So he come over. So he was born 1929. So he came. Brady Street he was from, 1936, couldn't speak English. Yiddish was his only language. Hitler had killed half his family, settled in the East End, and kind of arguably, well, according to Frank Warren, he was the greatest influence British boxing's ever had. Very, very successful guy. The Cray twins were plotting to murder him just before he was arrested. Jack Spot Comer had manhandled him, and he was a guy who just didn't give a shit about anyone. And of course, he coined the very iconic phrase of "if you want loyalty, buy a dog." Yeah, fascinating.
Frank Warren kind of put him out of business, though, didn't he? Really? He.
The funny thing is, when Frank Warren was shot in 1989, Mickey Duff made a very public statement, and he said it couldn't have been anyone in boxing because they wouldn't have missed. He had that really dry Jewish sense of humour, always a bit of a sinister glare, but he did. You're so right. So Mickey Duff, Terry Lawless, they were all Mike Barrett, Jarvis Astaire. They were kind of known as the cartel. The young Frank Warren come up, and I mean well, he's still around today, isn't he? But yeah, the East End is. I was actually at the house the other week of. I don't know whether you've heard of Daniel Mendoza.
Yeah.
The prize fighter from,
I think he's buried in the Jewish cemetery on Brady Street. I think he is.
I imagine he would be, along with the likes of.
Some of the rock stars are buried in there.
Really?
I've been in there. It's difficult to get in, but you've got to make an appointment to get in. But it's quite interesting. It's just round the corner from Bucks Row or Durwood Street. Yeah.
Can I ask you one question before you go?
When you come down, we'll have to get in there and have a look.
That'd be fabulous. Who was it you said to me last year? You said, "Oh, so and so's buried, and do you want to see his grave?" Was it Lechmere or
was it Lusk?
George Lusk. That was. So I was at his house this week, and I sat there. I think it was Alderney Street or something. It's just off Mile End, and you look at the name.
I have a joke with Mick Priestley. He actually, in addresses then, they used to give. Usually they'd give two streets. They give the if you're on a side street, they give the name of the side street, and then they give the main street. So you could find it easily and identify where the street was if it's a little tiny back street. So he lived in Tollett Street, number 1 Tollett Street, but the address is given as number 1 Tollett Street, Alderney Street or Alderney Road. I think it's called Alderney Road now, but it might have been Alderney Street at the time. And so he really lived at number 1 Tollett Street. But because it was number 1 Tollett Street, Alderney Road, sometimes they missed out the Tolwich Street, just said number 1 Alderney Road, but it wasn't. It was number 1 Tolwich Street on Alderney Road. There's a different address, number 1 Alderney Road. And I always have a bit of a joke with Mick Priestley about whether he lived on Alderney Road or Tolwich Street. But he actually lived on Tolwich Street.
Walking around with Mick, and he showed me where John Pizer lived. You know, it is
Mulberry Street, wasn't it? Mulberry Road, Mulberry Street.
Yes, 22, which obviously it's gone now since the wars. I mean, George Lusk, the character, I mean, he was quite a mild-mannered man, but in the film, they had him as this violent man. I mean, are you aware, Ed, that the guy who played George Lusk in the film of Michael Caine killed himself, like, less than a year after the film?
Did he? He was quite a well-known actor, though, wasn't he? I can't remember his name, but he was quite a well-known actor, that guy. He always played slightly unhinged characters, though, didn't he? Perhaps he wasn't. If he killed himself, perhaps he was.
Yeah, he was dead by. Do you know? I'm going to check up and send you. But I know he was dead within a year of the film. One question before I let you go: did you watch The Reckoning with Jimmy Savile?
I'm halfway through watching it now, actually. Yeah, I've watched the first 2 episodes. I was saying to a friend, it's quite an interesting program. The BBC. I'm not a great fan of the BBC, but they do some things very well. So their drama output is very good. Their production quality on these things is very good. The one, but because I did this film about the Yorkshire Ripper very recently, it just struck me that he lived in this flat in Roundhay Road or Roundhay Street, which is opposite Roundhay Park, which was Peter Sutcliffe's most popular dumping ground for bodies, and he literally overlooked it. And I know there's all sorts of conspiracy theories trying to link Jimmy Savile to the Yorkshire murders. But the interesting thing I think about Coogan is that he's good impressions, isn't he? And he the way he's doing Savile is like an impression of someone doing Jimmy Savile. Yeah, and I'm conscious that it's Coogan doing an impression of Jimmy Savile. And also, I've only seen, say, the first 2 episodes so far, and the way they're portraying him, I think, makes me feel sorry for Jimmy Savile actually at the moment, like he's slightly hard done by.
When you watch the last one, you will feel that, because it does make you feel sorry for him. But then again, I felt sorry for Saddam Hussein when they dragged him out the bunker in 2003. But you know, I was in Leeds the other week at Roundhill Park, because obviously I'm doing a boxer guy, and he had a lot. Well, he knew Savile when, like, he'd be sniffing around the homes for girls, and Nick used to meet him. There was a calf just out the back. And, you know, Nick Manners is kind of fought Joe Calzaghe, big, good-looking guy. And Savile was there most mornings, and he'd say, "Oh, you're a good-looking guy. I bet you get some." The conversations would always go back sexual. But I was there probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, and where they filmed that is the correct exactly. But so he died 2011. He was exposed 2012, so his flat was sold 2013 by a couple, and then it was demolished in 2016. So that flat is no longer there. What was Savile's, although the building is. But absolutely,
it was the top floor, wasn't it? And they knocked the top floor down.
Yes, so it's just basically a walkway now.
It's weird, isn't it?
Savile bought it for $250,000.
But he was he was very tight-fisted, wasn't he? And that's a sort of Yorkshire stereotype, isn't it? Absolutely. But I think he was very, very mean and watching his pennies and all this sort of thing, his hard-earned cash, and that comes across in the thing. Well, and he, as you say, he wouldn't eat in like the Ivy or something. He'd go in a local cafe, wouldn't he?
Well, I'm going to send you a video in a minute, because I was at somewhere today which he went every single day. Well, he went a lot for probably 24 years. And I'll send you that. But Ed, it's been an absolute pleasure, sir. I'm going to send you a video on something. I'm going to send you a little Palmo thing. And listen, mate, I'll see you in about March time when the light nights are there, and I'll be down. And I will be there a few times a year, so we definitely need to meet up and do something.
I'll do a video of you. I'll put it on my channel. Do a walk around with you.
That'll be fabulous, mate. Absolutely fabulous. Can I ask you, what did you think of the summit about Whitechapel? Because I never wanted. The first thing I did was, I'm not an Ed Stow, I'm not a Lindsay Siver, I'm not a Richard Jones. I'm just a guy who's as passionate about them all put together. But it was a look. It was a look on, and obviously it wasn't all about the murders. It was a boxing one. There was a West Ham one. There was a jelly. There was a lot of social history, mythology, folklore. Did you finish reading it?
Yeah, of course I did. Yeah, it was a mood piece, wasn't it? Really, a mood piece about the to capture the ethos of the East End, if you like, wasn't it? Really,
yeah, exactly what it was.
No, it was
You
a
know,
good book.
the Cockneys in the back, the rhyme and slang and all that. So, do you know what? I'm going to let you go now, sir. I've got stuff to watch. So, Ed, always a pleasure, mate. Listen, I'm going
Just a quick thing, like you,
Sorry.
I'm not from the East End. I moved there. I lived there for quite a long time, but like you, I was infatuated with all these things like Cockney rhyming slang and all these things which make up the East End. So I've probably got quite a lot in common with you in that respect, because all those elements that come together to make the culture of the place were very unique and distinct, weren't they?
Absolutely. And do you know what? It was a real pleasure doing that book. It was, it was just, I'm very, there's books I can't be asked to, and then there's some you just think I'd do it for nout. And that was just one that it was a pleasure speaking to yourself and the people I did. It was just like, it was just a pleasure to listen to people. But as I said, your video, the channel is the House of Lechmere. Absolutely gripping stuff. Go into the bio, give it a click, give it a like. I'm going to share it on my community page in a minute. Also, Ed, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks a lot. Cheers, then.
God bless.
Bye bye. Bye bye.